Hi guys, I'm Andrea and I'm going to be doing my June wrap up today. It was Pride month in the month of June, so I read a lot of queer books. I read 8 books this month, and let's start with the first one. The first one I read was Queer There and Everywhere, 23 People Who Changed the World. And this book is really short. It's tiny, but it's just basically that, 23 queer people who changed the world throughout history. There was a lot of people I didn't know who were queer in that book, so I learned a lot from it. I had Abraham Lincoln. I did not know Abraham Lincoln was queer. We do not learn about these things in class or in school, but it's very short. So because it's short, the language is kind of informal. It's friendly, it kind of uses a lot of slang. So if you're looking for something more in-depth or comprehensive, this probably wasn't the book for you. But if you're looking for something quick and broad and like easy to teach, I think this is a good book for like younger readers. Like if you're entering your teenage years or something like that, this is a great book to get an introduction to all that. And the illustrations are honestly amazing. I love them. And yeah, the next book I want to talk about is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, because well, I was supposed to read this book. I had started reading this book. I was super excited to read this book. I think I even commented on a couple other people's videos saying I'm really excited to start this book. But the thing is, I ended up going to my friend's graduations, college graduations, the same day I started this book, and I lost track of time, and I basically didn't finish it because I got sidetracked and I was there in their college town for a few days. So before I knew it, the book was due. I have this problem where my library books get overdue and I end up having to pay the fines. So I ended up having to pick up The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue instead as a substitute, and well, I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. I think my problem with this book specific is that I'm just not a person that goes for romance or fluffy reads, especially in YA. I don't really like when romance is the center of the book. I don't like fluffy books. So I think that was a big problem for me. And for me, a book needs to hook me in probably within the first 100 pages. And this book just didn't do it for me. I don't know why I couldn't connect with the characters. I would have to like reread pages because my mind would start drifting off and thinking about food or something. The next 2 books I want to talk about, and I'm talking side by side because they're so similar in themes, is History Is All You Left Me and We Are the Ants. They both kind of center on the themes of grief, depression, and death, and how people kind of react to the combination of all these 3 things. So History Is All You Left Me is about this New York boy called Griffin who is kind of reeling after the sudden death of his first love and first boyfriend, Theo. Theo had moved to California, and at the time of his death, they had been broken up. Theo had he had an accident in the ocean. He ended up dying. He ended up drowning, and so Theo's body is flown back to New York, and Griffin goes to the funeral, even though they had had that time of distance. I guess they weren't together anymore. So at the funeral, Griffin meets Theo's new boyfriend, Jackson. Ooh, I forgot his name. So Griffin and Jackson are kind of dealing with the same grief in a way of this person they really loved, and they're kind of forced to become friends and just learn to share the grief together and learn to mourn together, and they end up getting very close. So this book kind of has alternating chapters. It goes from the past to the present. It keeps going back and forth, and I think the first page actually starts on November 20th, 2016, I think, which November 20th is actually my birthday. It's also the day of the Mexican Revolution. Not important. Okay, but I think it was cool that it was back and forth, because I think it kind of shows that, you know, grief is non-linear and it's messy, and some days you'll be really good and some days it feels like your world is falling apart. And I think that by having these kind of alternating timelines of, you know, sadness and like happiness, and like you kind of get that happy, sad, bittersweet anger that comes when somebody dies and comes with the mourning process. So I really appreciate that Adam did that in his novel. I think when somebody dies, a lot of people have this tendency to have that person's memory as something almost holy, sacred, and by having that as a sacred, holy memory, you kind of turn that person into a caricature of what they were. You start to believe that they never did anything wrong, that all their actions were good and they never did anything wrong with their life, when the reality is that humans are much more complex and full of death and that, and people make mistakes even if they're dead. They still made mistakes during their life, and I think that's something that Griffin kind of slowly realizes through the book. So the next book I read was We Are the Ants, which is very similar to History Is All You Left Me. They deal with very similar themes. They kind of have very similar characters as well, except that We Are the Ants kind of deals with, I think, depression in a more focused lens, and it has this kind of soft sci-fi aspect to it. So We Are the Ants is about a boy named Henry who is regularly abducted by aliens he calls sluggers. So these sluggers always abduct him at random times, and they've been doing it for years, and he kind of just goes with it. One day he gets abducted, and the aliens kind of tell him that the earth has 144 days left. In 144 days, the world as Henry knows it will be destroyed, and Henry has the power to stop it all with the push of a red button. They present him with this red button, and they show him if he wants to save the earth, all he has to do is push this button. And Henry doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know if he should save her. Henry is kind of dealing and reeling from the death of his boyfriend who committed suicide, and he just has a horrible family life. There's a lot of, fights and drama, and he's distanced himself from his friends because of his boyfriend's suicide, and he's involved himself with some very trash people. This book, I think, in that way deals with depression so interesting because I hadn't seen it, I think I haven't read it through a sci-fi lens before, because at the end of the book it's up to the reader's interpretation if you think the sluggers were actually there or not, or they were a manifestation of Henry's depression. But on top of that, Henry, the way he deals with the grief and the depression is by sleeping with this asshole called Marcus. Marcus is also a high schooler that goes to Henry's school, who is just annoying and trash, but on top of that, he kind of embodies toxic masculinity. Marcus, he is confused by his sexuality and his emotions, and he deals with them with the only way he knows, which is lashing out in anger. And as much as Henry is sympathetic for him, as a reader, you're just like, Henry goes to one of Marcus's parties. Marcus is like this very rich dude. He has like a mansion, and Henry shows up to Marcus's mansion party unannounced, and Marcus just like freaks out, and everybody around him is kind of making fun of Henry for being there, and Marcus just goes along with it, even though literally a few pages before that they were like making out, having sex, and it's just like, what the fuck? Henry, I feel, has this kind of Romeo and Juliet syndrome in which that you could tell, or you can imply that before his boyfriend's death, his boyfriend had become his entire world and became his only outlet for happiness. And as much as you love a person, that's not healthy either, and you could really sense that. And as the book progressed, Henry began to develop other interests and other things that he loved, and it's kind of cool to see him discover passions and other things and just heal his grief but not get rid of it entirely. The next book I read was Tomorrow Will Be Different, Love, Loss, and the Fight for Trans Equality by Sarah McBride, and this is a memoir. It is nonfiction. I love this book. It is so powerful, so poignant, so beautifully written. Sarah McBride was the first transgender woman to speak at a national convention, at a major national political convention in 2016. She spoke at the DNC, and I included a little snippet of her. If you guys have watched my June TBR, which you should watch if you haven't already, I will be putting a thumbnail here. I inserted a little clip of her speaking. She was the first trans woman to speak at a major political convention, which is a really big deal. But she has always been involved in politics herself. She's kind of this activist powerhouse. Since she was a teenager, she interned with Joe Biden and Illinois Governor Jack McElroy, I think his name is, and she interned and helped out with both of their campaigns for election. And she was the student body president at American University, which at the end of her kind of tenure, she announced on Facebook that she was a transgender woman, and that kind of went viral and ended up being blasted everywhere on the news. So Sarah, after she graduated, she ended up interning. What is English? She ended up interning. She ended up becoming an intern for the White House, and she also became a lobbyist for transgender rights in the state of Delaware. The emotional core of the story definitely is her relationship with Andy, a trans man who is also a lawyer and activist for trans rights in Washington, D.C. And they fall in love, and they just have this whirlwind romance, and it's just so cute. But as the memoir progresses, Andy develops cancer, and you are just heartbroken with Sarah as he gets worse and worse and worse. Sarah in the book is always aware of her privilege. She is a white trans woman who grew up in a very kind of middle-class home and with very accepting parents, and she's super aware of that. She always makes note of it, that she's able to do the things she has in terms of fighting and getting through to people and having this access to governors and stuff because she has this privilege. The foreword of the book is written by Joe Biden, and I didn't read it at the start. I decided to leave it off until I finished the book, which I definitely recommend if you are planning on picking this book up. I think the words that Joe Biden says really resonate and create an emotional connection more if you read it at the end, because you can directly kind of reference events that happen in the book to the words that he's saying on the page. And she's just a very powerful person. She's so cool, and I hope to see a lot more of her in the coming years in politics. The next books I read, I just picked up randomly, and they aren't part of my June TBR, but I was presented with the chance to read them, so I read them. And the first one is The Refrigerator Monologues by Catherine and Valente. The women in comic books are usually treated horribly, and that's no surprise to anybody. And I don't read comic books a lot, but I do read a lot of Wikia pages on comic books. So I had an easy time, I think, reading this book because they dealt with like very unpopular characters, so I knew who they were talking about and what characters they were referencing. Because of like copyright and all kind of different laws, they weren't called by their real names, they had fake names. So there was characters that were supposed to be like Mara or Gwen or Jean Grey, and they were all in this book, they just had different names. So this deals with the women characters that keep getting killed off or just plot devices for the male superheroes to have some man pain. My favorite story in this book would have to be the Jean Grey inspired one, because it features Elysian, who I love, so that was cool to read. But yeah, women need to be treated better in books, in media, in general. I feel like it is something that should be really common sense by now, but it's not, and it's just like, why? The next book I read was The Hazelwood, because the cover just like called to me from the bookshelf in my library, so I had to pick it up. I'm really looking forward to the second one. It wasn't my favorite, but I'm glad this is kind of like my reintroduction to urban fantasy, hopefully. So. And the last book I read in the month of June was Circe, which I finally got off of hold from the library, and I was so happy to have it in my hands, finally. I was a big fan of Madeline Miller's other book, Song of Achilles, so I could not wait to get this in my hands, and I ended up loving it 10 times more than I did Song of Achilles. This book, literally amazing. It really centers around female agency, which I adored. It follows Circe, who you might remember from the Odyssey, who was the witch or goddess of magic that ended up taking Odysseus and his company onto her island, and then she fed them, and then she turned them all into pigs, because that's what they were on the inside. Pigs. I say this is a story about female agency because Madeline Miller creates a character that has been kind of told her entire life who she is, and she's been humiliated, and she's been kept within the confines of those labels throughout her entire life. Her father is the Titan Helios, and he hates her. He thinks that she's basically useless. Her siblings always make fun of her. They call her ugly. They say she has an ugly voice, that she looks too human, that she acts too human. But as the story kind of progresses, Circe grows into these labels and she reclaims them. She turns them into her power rather than her weakness. I read this book in one night, but it felt like I had been reading it for literally days because each phrase is so poetic and so wonderfully crafted and deliberately placed, which I think really helped the overall, story of the book. There are some scenes of like sexual assault and rape. They don't go too detailed, but if that bothers you, definitely watch out for it in this book. And I'll finish this wrap up with one of my favorite quotes from Circe, which is, "It is a common saying that women are delicate creatures, flowers, eggs, anything that may be crushed in a moment's carelessness. If I had ever believed it, I no longer did." And I think that really captures the themes of Circe so perfectly, and the arc. She grows into the woman she was always supposed to be. Even though she's a goddess, she grows into the person she was always supposed to be. Yep, those are the books I read in June. I think this is going to be a pretty long wrap up. I'm going to try to cut it down, and if you stayed throughout the entire video, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.